talking to Cornelius. Conversation 19. It's time to begin to tell her story as best I can, old man. The trouble is, I only know a handful of meagre facts. But then if I've learned anything from you, it's that whole worlds can be gleaned from a handful of facts. You just have to make sure you've got the right ones. She was a County Clare girl. I know that because she said as much at your 50th wedding anniversary in 1902. She was born in 1826, the same year as you. But unlike you, she wouldn't have had that hard northern grind in her accent, and she wasn't marked with years in the convict system. I think I can safely say she was named after Brigid the Kildare saint, rather than Brigid the pre-Christian goddess of early springs, fertility, healing, and smithcraft. But I wonder if your Brigid had any of the poetry of that ancient goddess about her. Did she have her share of the keening and the song that was said to have come from that most ancient Brigid? Maybe there was something of the Christian saint's eternal flame in your Brigid's demeanour. Mind you, the saint's flame seemed to have a role in keeping men at a distance. The fact of my existence suggests your Brigid's flame wasn't quite as vigorous. She was Brigid Lyons, and her family crest carried all the ferocity of rampant lions set and ready to strike. Nolle irritare leones. Do not irritate the lions. Giaguich mamo. Hello, Grandma. God be at you, Grandma. There are things about her early life that I can say with some degree of confidence. I imagine when she was 17 and repeal was an electric current through the air, she was swept up in the enormous spectacle of Dan O'Connell's monster rally at Ennis. Everyone was there. Thousands poured into the town, and not just from Clare, but also the neighbouring counties. People were decked out in bright colours. Temperance bands pumped out endless songs as they processed through the streets. Voices were raised. Out with the Saxons! Banners proclaimed, Ireland for the Irish! And when King Dan took to the stage, everyone erupted with Handel's See the Conquering Hero Comes. What a memory to have, Mamo. With all the mad glory and noise and aspiration of the moment, the power and the voice of tens of thousands of people, the eloquence of the liberator on the stage, the music that could set feet thumping. It must have felt like there was nothing but better days to come, especially for a 17-year-old girl with all her life ahead of her. In the glory of that moment, it was possible to forget the daily poverty, and it was impossible to see what lay ahead, the devastation to come across the land, the death of Dan O'Connell in 47, the dissolution of all that talk of repeal, save for a half-baked uprising of the young islanders a few years down the track, the rapid exodus of people from their ancestral land, and the deep trauma that would last through generations. Now I'm going to say something I suspect you wouldn't disagree with, old man, but others might find surprising. The years ahead for young Brigid Lyons were far darker than your years of imprisonment and probation. Sure, you were transported as a convict, and you would have seen and experienced brutality. But Bridget was a Clare girl, and Clare was the epicentre of the approaching famine. And Clare was the site of some of the most barbarous instances of those violent mass evictions that came to be known as the clearances. We are inclined to smile at some of the prescriptions we read in the English papers as instructions to the starving Irish to supply themselves with food as a substitute for potatoes. We find the following in the Agricultural Gazette. I strongly recommend the poor man who has only a small piece of ground to give up potatoes altogether this year and substitute either carrots or parsnips or a proportion of both. These, well boiled with and mixed with rice, with the addition of a bit of bacon and a modicum of pepper and salt, will prove a most excellent dish, not more expensive than potatoes, and exceeding the latter in nourishment, comparing one with the other. We shan't charge the writer with a desire of humbugging the Irish, but his recommendation to them to give up potatoes altogether this year is quite superfluous, as they have none to give up. But we wish he would prescribe how they could get means to obtain any one of the ingredients of his savoury dish. He writes, like most of his countrymen, in perfect ignorance of the real state of the impoverished Irish. The Limerick Reporter, 24th of April, 1846. Bridget's experiences as a young adult were marked by an all-surrounding death. Death on the roadsides and in the fields. Death in the road crews where the starving worked for a meagre government wage that was never enough to feed their families. Death in sealed-up houses where whole families lay together. Death in a silent land because anything that could be caught and eaten had been already. Death among the shivering skeletal crowds made homeless by landlords who had torn down their houses in the name of property consolidation. Death in the physical grind of hunger in a body that we can barely comprehend today. Mary Driscoll saw her father last alive on Saturday the 10th. He took a little breakfast with her then. He ate all he got, but not enough. It was a stirabout made a barley meal. She had that morning for breakfast, for 9 in the family, 3 pints of barley meal, but the child on her breast did not use any of it. Her father's brother was one of the 9 because he was working on the road with her father. Her father was 7 days working on the road and 1 day waiting at it. The 3 pints were not sufficient food for them. They had no dinner that day, nor any other food for breakfast or dinner on Friday, but a quarter of a weight of small potatoes. On Thursday, they had about 3 pints of barley meal. She had about a barrel of barley on the ground, but the landlord put a cross on it and would not allow her to use it. The landlord is Mr. O'Grady of the county of Limerick. On Friday she eats some potatoes out of her own field, in which there were a few still. She would dig a ridge of them, would be tired digging them before she could dig enough for one. When she saw her father on Sunday morning, he was dead. As he didn't go home on Saturday night, she, her mother and others went to look for him. Deceased had no sickness, but on Friday he complained he was hungry. When she went home on Saturday, she had a little barley. Her father would have got share of it if he'd returned home. She ate none of it because she was sorry for her father. Neither did her mother. He didn't get enough to eat on any one day of the week. On Friday, he ate none of the potatoes, to leave them to the children because they used to be crying of hunger. The Cork Examiner, 16th of October, 1846. My dear sir, a great number of the able-bodied men, labourers and cottiers are employed on the public works in this district. Still, there is great and awful destitution. It is evident that 10 pence a day is not sufficient to procure food and other necessaries for a man and his whole family. The aged and infirm, the widows and the orphans have no means of support. Even the poorhouse is closed against them. Women with infant children in their arms break stones on the road. Sometimes you might see a half-naked poor woman holding a child to the breast with one hand, while she, the famishing mother, is endeavouring to break stones with the other in order to earn the price of a quart of meal. What a spectacle for men and angels! The state of the sick and dying is worse again. No relief to them but death. You, Mr. Editor, may ask, as the government scribes do, what are the priests and parsons and committee doing? Why do they not relieve such cases? If they did so, even from the small fund subscribed by themselves, they would be told plainly enough that they had thereby forfeited any claim to government aid. According to the government regulations, relief is only to be given to those who labour. Starvation and death to those who cannot. Oh, what a wise and paternal government! Had a small farmer a stack or two of corn preserved for seed or the support of his family, he was denounced in government papers as unjust to his landlord and ungenerous to his neighbours, as by selling this he would assist in keeping down the market price of meal. Yes, and at the same time enable the merchant to export it to England. Letter to the Editor from Dr. D. Vaughan, Vicar General, Killaloe. The Pilot, Dublin, 16th of December, 1846. If there is any lingering trace of ancestral trauma that sometimes might cross our souls today, that flares up at the incursion of a landlord, or an act of thoughtless waste, or the potential vulnerability of debt, I suspect it has more to do with the terror of the famine than the drag of convict chains. Ah, Drimmon Dondillis, the landlord is come. Like a foul blast of death, he has swept o'er our home. He has withered the roof tree beneath the cold sky, and houseless and homeless tonight we must lie. With my health and my strength, with hard labour and toil, I drained the wet marsh and I tilled the harsh soil. I toiled the long day through, from morning till even, and I thought in my heart I'd a foretaste of heaven. But they racked me and ground me with tax and with rent, till my heart it was seared and my lifeblood was spent. Ah, it's hard to forgive it, and to think I must bear that strangers shall reap the reward of my care. I knelt down 3 times for to utter a prayer, but my heart it was cold, and the words were not there. Ah, wild were the thoughts through my dizzy head came, like the rushing of wind through a forest of flame. I bid you, old comrade, a long last farewell, for the gaunt hand of famine has clutched us too well. It has severed the master, and you, my good cow, with a blight on my life and a brand on your brow.